Landslides, storm surges, and total chaos. Typhoon Uwan's full power has been unleashed, and what's happening right now is beyond anything meteorologists predicted possible. Picture entire mountainsides collapsing in seconds, burying villages under tons of mud and rock. Coastal towns vanishing beneath 20-foot walls of water that appeared out of nowhere. This isn't just another Pacific storm. This is nature unleashing its absolute fury in ways that are rewriting the disaster playbook in real time. Emergency teams are completely overwhelmed as Uwan tears through populated areas with winds exceeding 200 miles per hour. But here's what's really shocking rescue workers. The storm is creating its own weather patterns, spawning tornadoes inside the eyewall and generating lightning strikes that are setting entire forests ablaze, even in the middle of torrential rain. Satellite footage shows the typhoon doing something meteorologists say should be impossible. It is actually growing stronger as it moves over land, feeding off heat sources that should not exist, and maintaining its deadly power when it should be weakening. Is Typhoon Uwan just a freak weather event, or are we witnessing the birth of a new class of superstorm that could make every hurricane in history look like a gentle breeze? Relentless rhythm. Every year, the Philippines faces a relentless rhythm of storms. 20 to 25 named cyclones sweep through the islands on average, each one carving scars into the landscape. But the 2025 season arrived with a vengeance. Only days before Typhoon Uwan appeared on satellite maps, Typhoon Kalmaegi had already drenched Luzon with torrents of rain, flooding rice fields, saturating hillsides, and leaving riverbanks swollen and unstable. In provinces like Aurora and Nueva Vizcaya, rainfall totals from Kalmaegi shattered local records, with some areas receiving more than 400 millimeters in a single week. By the time Uwan began its approach, the ground was already waterlogged. Streams ran high, and even gentle slopes oozed mud with every step. Primed. For farmers and families living along mountain ridges, each new downpour meant a fresh wave of anxiety. The soil, stripped of its grip by weeks of rain, was primed for disaster. In the forests above Baylor, tree roots clung to earth that no longer held together, and in the valleys, villagers watched the rivers rise, carrying branches and debris downstream. The memory of past landslides haunted communities, especially those who remembered the aftermath of Typhoon Yolanda and Goni, when entire neighborhoods vanished beneath walls of mud. Strained. The country's disaster agencies tracked rainfall accumulation and issued warnings, but the sheer frequency of storms left little time for recovery. Emergency shelters still housed families displaced by Kalmaegi as Uwan's first rain band swept in. Roads that had just been cleared of debris were once again threatened by falling trees and rock slides. In some barangays, makeshift dikes and sandbags stood as the only defense against another round of flooding. On edge. The landscape itself was on edge. In the highlands, deforestation and hillside farming had stripped away the last buffers against runoff. In the lowlands, rice paddies and settlements sprawled into floodplains that offered little protection. Even volcanoes like Mayon and Pinatubo became hazards, as heavy rains threatened to unleash lahars, fast-moving rivers of volcanic ash and debris. Stretched thin. By the time Uwan's winds began to howl, the Philippines was already stretched thin. Recovery teams, medical staff, and relief supplies were still scattered across the archipelago from the last disaster. The air was thick with tension, every community bracing for impact, knowing that one more storm could tip the balance from hardship to catastrophe. Typhoon Uwan was never just another storm on the radar. Its monstrous presence filled the entire satellite view, an unbroken swirl stretching 1,800 kilometers from edge to edge, wider than the distance from Manila to Hong Kong. Meteorologists watched with disbelief as wind speeds climbed to 185 kilometers per hour, with gusts reaching 230 kilometers per hour. What set Uwan apart was not only its strength, but its speed of transformation. In less than 24 hours, the system intensified from a standard typhoon to a super typhoon, a process that usually unfolds over days, not hours. Real-time Doppler and satellite data showed an eye expanding rapidly, surrounded by tightly coiled bands of deep convection, each one pulsing with energy drawn from the warm waters of the Philippine Sea. Dr. Elmer Beltran, senior meteorologist at PAGASA, described the astonishment. "We are seeing energy transfers never before recorded in landfalling systems." Uwan defied every theoretical weakening principle. The storm's core maintained its structure even as it crossed the rugged terrain of Aurora, something that should have shredded its organization. Instead, Uwan's sheer size allowed it to keep pulling in moisture and heat, not just from the ocean, but also from flooded plains and river valleys. This rare combination let the typhoon hold on to its power, refusing to weaken as quickly as models predicted. Satellite loops captured the impossible, a storm growing more organized after landfall. Meteorologists scrambled to interpret the data. Some pointed to deep reserves of ocean heat left behind by the previous storm, Kalmaegi, which had not cooled the sea surface as much as expected. Others noted the storm's vast diameter, which let it scoop up energy from a huge area, keeping its engine running long after the center crossed the coastline. Embedded within Uwan's eyewall, radar signatures revealed rotating vortices and bursts of lightning, signs of a system operating outside the usual playbook. For scientists, Uwan became a case study in the limits of prediction. No amount of modeling had suggested a storm could maintain this level of violence so far inland. The technical community was left searching for answers, as Uwan's behavior called into question long-held assumptions about how tropical cyclones weaken. On the ground, the consequences of this meteorological anomaly would soon be felt in every battered village and flooded city in its path. At dawn, the roar of sirens and the pounding of rain signaled a race against time. In the towns of Aurora, evacuation orders came not as a suggestion, but as a last warning. Over 1.4 million people surged toward higher ground, clutching children, pets, and whatever they could carry. Schoolyards, basketball courts, and even unfinished malls became makeshift shelters. The Baylor Sports Complex alone filled with nearly 18,000 people, families pressed shoulder to shoulder on concrete floors, the air thick with fear and sweat. Barangay Captain Lito Ramirez of Dingalan stood at the crossroads of impossible choices. With only hours before the mountains might give way, he pored over risk maps, his radio crackling with updates. The first calls went to homes at the base of the slope, grandparents, newborns, the disabled. Volunteers and police fanned out, knocking on doors, shouting through the wind. But with roads already flooding and mud creeping closer, not every house could be reached. Ramirez's voice broke as he recalled. There wasn't enough time. Choosing who to save felt like a death sentence for others. I pray I made the right calls. In the chaos, some families refused to leave, haunted by memories of past evacuations that ended in looting or empty promises. Others piled into battered trucks, wading through waist-high water as debris floated past. Along the coast, Batang, a fisherman from Dipacolao, hoisted his mother onto a makeshift raft fashioned from empty oil drums. The waves clawed at the shore, swallowing landmarks and erasing paths. Batang's voice trembled as he recalled, "We ran because the sea was coming for us." I didn't look back. Inside the shelters, new crises unfolded. Water ran low within hours. A pregnant woman doubled over in pain as the storm's eye passed overhead. Medical volunteers scrambled to deliver her baby by flashlight, while the wind rattled the roof and children sobbed in the dark. Rumors of landslides and missing neighbors spread through the crowd, each update tightening the knot of dread. As the hours dragged on, the cracks in the evacuation effort grew wider. Some who made it to safety were forced to watch, powerless, as news filtered in of buried villages and vanished roads. For every life saved, another story of loss took root. and as the rain hammered down, the moral weight of every decision, who to warn, who to leave behind, settled heavily on those tasked with choosing. The storm outside was matched only by the turmoil within, as the line between survival and sacrifice blurred with each passing minute. Unexpected destruction. The first landslide struck without warning, a roar, a tremor, then a wall of earth and shattered trees swallowing the village of Nalangan before dawn. In those seconds, the mountainside simply ceased to exist, replaced by a churning river of mud. 8 lives were lost in Nalangan alone, their families left to search for answers in the silence that followed. Across Aurora and Nueva Ecija, dozens more slopes gave way, blocking roads, burying homes, and cutting entire towns off from the outside world. Rainfall gauges registered their highest readings in years, but the ground, already weakened by Kalmagi's rains, offered no resistance. Emergency sirens wailed through the darkness, but for many, the warnings came too late. Grid failure. As the mountains collapsed, another disaster unfolded in the valleys below. At 2:17 in the morning, the regional power grid failed. 3 million households lost electricity in an instant. Hospitals, evacuation centers, and command posts plunged into blackout. In Nueva Ecija's provincial command center, rescue coordinator Marites Cruz watched her screens flicker and die. GPS tracking for search teams vanished. Radios sputtered with static. For 47 minutes, every decision had to be made blind, as teams scrambled through the chaos, guessing at the locations of those trapped by landslides. 2 more deaths were later traced to this blackout, victims unreachable as the mud advanced. Hard choices. Cruz and her crew faced a choice: wait for orders or act on instinct. She grabbed a battered flashlight and led her team into the storm, wading through chest-deep water and dodging live wires that hissed and sparked in the flood. Each step was a gamble. Twice rising currents nearly swept her away. Still, she pressed on, driven by the knowledge that Dr. Jose Reyes Memorial Hospital, now running on failing battery backups, held hundreds of patients, newborns, and the wounded from earlier landslides. Restoring power meant the difference between life and death. A moment of salvation. 12 hours after the first collapse, Cruz's team managed to reconnect the hospital to a backup grid. The relief in the wards was immediate. A newborn's cry, ventilators humming back to life, doctors able to see their patients again. But outside, the situation remained dire. Roads were blocked by debris, and communication lines were down. Rescue teams resorted to handwritten notes and runners to coordinate their efforts. The storm had exposed every weakness in the system, from fragile power lines to the thin lines separating order from chaos. Unbroken resolve. Through it all, frontline workers like Marites Cruz refused to give up. Each wire reset, each risk taken, became an act of defiance against the storm's destruction. Their determination offered a thin thread of hope, even as the mountains continued to crumble and the blackout stretched on. Permit files stacked high in the Aurora Provincial Hall tell a story of shortcuts and pressure. In the years leading up to Uwan, developers lobbied for fast-tracked approvals, pushing housing projects and resorts into areas flagged as high risk on hazard maps. Subdivisions like Harbor Residences and Crestview Villas rose quickly, their glossy brochures promising ocean views and mountain air, never mentioning the landslide and storm surge warnings buried in regulatory reports. Professor Amparo Santos, an urban planning expert from UP Diliman, reviewed these documents and found a pattern. She said, regulatory shortcuts helped put entire subdivisions into the path of disaster. Environmental audits were skipped or rushed. Local officials, under pressure to attract investment and meet housing quotas, signed off on projects that should have been halted at the first sign of risk. Disaster relief funds, already drained by Typhoon Kalmagi, offered little cushion when Uwan arrived. Provincial ledgers show emergency reserves nearly empty, supplies of fuel, food, and medicine depleted by back-to-back crises. Requests for additional aid from the national government stalled as agencies argued over allocation and paperwork. In Baylor and Dingalan, mayors faced impossible choices: ration what little remained, or wait for shipments that might never come. The result was chaos at every level. Evacuation centers overcrowded, rescue teams stretched thin, and communities left exposed. For families who lost everything, the sense of betrayal runs deep. The storm may have been a force of nature, but the disaster's reach was widened by human decisions, by the permits granted against expert advice, and by a system that left relief efforts starved of resources when they were needed most. Professor Santos's words echo over the ruins. She said, "We built our vulnerability, paper by paper, signature by signature." Official tallies say 8 lives lost to Uwan, but the reality is far murkier. In the chaos of collapsed cell towers and blocked roads, local registries and hospital logs from Aurora and Bicol hint at a much higher toll: 27 dead in 3 barangays alone, with dozens still unaccounted for. National figures always lag behind the true cost, especially when disasters cut off entire towns. After Yolanda, after Odette, the same pattern played out. Survivors counted the dead while official reports trickled in days or weeks later. In the first 72 hours, every storm's impact is underestimated, its casualties hidden by silence and debris. Data gap is not just a bureaucratic failing, it is a warning. Each missing name represents a family left in limbo, a community waiting for answers. Without accurate, real-time information, aid cannot reach those most desperate. Hospitals run low on supplies, rescue teams search the wrong neighborhoods, and the cycle of loss repeats. The disconnect between field reports and national summaries means that the full scale of disaster often remains invisible until the headlines have faded. Future uncertainty. Scientists and disaster experts warn that the future holds even greater uncertainties. The climate is warming, the oceans are hotter, and the strongest typhoons are now more intense and more frequent than ever before. Models project that by 2050, storms like Uwan could become the new normal, packing heavier rains, higher winds, and more devastating surges. Yet even as technology advances, the gap between what is happening on the ground and what is recorded in official data threatens to widen. The risk is not just more powerful storms, but the possibility that, in the fog of disaster, entire tragedies will go uncounted, unprepared for, and unheeded. Right now, nearly 3 million households sit in darkness, while saturated hillsides threaten to give way at any moment. As storms intensify and old boundaries vanish, disaster isn't just breaking records, it's rewriting the rules of survival. The next super typhoon may not wait for warnings. For millions, the true test begins after the winds die down. Typhoon Fung-wong just struck the Philippines with 185 km/h winds, and scientists are terrified by what they found because this monster storm is breaking every rule in the meteorological playbook. Picture a typhoon so massive it covers 2/3 of an entire country, packing winds of 230 km/h that triggered the Philippines' highest possible warning level. Signal number 5, reserved for catastrophic destruction. Over 1 million people have been evacuated as this beast made landfall in Aurora Province, already claiming 2 lives and turning entire regions into disaster zones. But here's what has weather experts completely stunned. Fung-wong's wind and rain bands are impossibly wide, stretching across distances that should be physically impossible for a single storm system. Satellite imagery shows a perfectly organized eyewall that is maintaining its structure despite hitting mountainous terrain that should tear any normal typhoon apart. Even more bizarre, the storm is generating storm surge and flooding patterns that do not match its official category, as if it is drawing power from sources meteorologists cannot identify. Emergency teams are bracing for impacts that exceed their worst-case scenarios. Is Fung-wong just an unusually large typhoon? Or are we witnessing the evolution of a new class of superstorm that could redefine what we think tropical cyclones can do? Every year, the Philippines braces for a relentless parade of storms. On average, between 20 and 25 tropical cyclones enter or form in the Philippine area of responsibility each year. About half of those make landfall, bringing a regular cycle of disruption, loss, and rebuilding. In recent decades, the country has seen a marked increase in the number of so-called super typhoons, storms with sustained winds exceeding 185 kilometers per hour. This new reality has pushed entire communities to live with an ever-present sense of risk, especially in Luzon and the Visayas, where the brunt of these tempests is often felt. The past 20 years have rewritten the baseline for what is considered a dangerous storm. Typhoons that once seemed rare now strike almost every season. Government agencies and local leaders have been forced to adapt, refining evacuation plans and investing in early warning systems. Forecasting has become a race as storms grow stronger and more unpredictable. Meteorologists rely on a network of satellites, Doppler radars, and automated weather stations to track these systems as they form and intensify over the warm Pacific waters. This is the environment into which Typhoon Fung-wong arrived. Not as an isolated monster, but as the latest and most extreme entry in a long, accelerating series of storms. For the people of the Philippines, the threat is never abstract. It is woven into daily life, shaping everything from school calendars to the design of homes. Each storm tests the limits of preparation, and each year, those limits are pushed a little further. Meteorologists in the Philippines depend on a web of sensors and cross-checks to keep the country one step ahead of disaster. Every tropical cyclone is tracked by a combination of land-based weather stations, Doppler radar, satellites, and coastal buoys. Each system provides a different piece of the puzzle: surface winds, rainfall, pressure, and the shifting shape of the storm itself. PAGASA, the National Weather Service, has strict protocols. No single reading is ever trusted alone. Satellite images are compared with radar scans, and both are checked against the real-time numbers coming in from ground stations. If one sensor goes down, another is supposed to fill the gap. Redundancy is not just best practice. It is the only way to catch sudden changes that could mean the difference between a safe evacuation and a tragedy. Analysts work in 30-minute windows, layering new data over the last, hunting for discrepancies. If two sources disagree by more than a few percent, the team pauses to investigate before issuing an alert. For a major upgrade, like raising the wind signal to the highest level, confirmation from at least 2 independent sensor types is required. Manual review by senior forecasters is mandatory when the network is degraded or readings seem off. This rigorous, multi-layered approach was stress-tested just days before Fung-wong, when Typhoon Kalmegi battered Luzon and knocked out several key stations.